3, back in the saddle. Dr. Eben Alexander, author of Living in a Mindful Universe, on top of Proof of Heaven. Living in a Mindful Universe. Okay, I'd say this. I feel like maybe it's losing value now that I say it so much, but I loved it. Specifically, chapter 13. And I think everyone knows who you are now, so that's why I'm not having you introduce yourself. It's chapter 13 talking about the soul lesson, reincarnation. That is something, you and I have spoken about this before. I lost a sibling to suicide in 2014. Over the years, and I've been someone that meditates a lot my whole life, for the last 12 years. Over the years, I began thinking that, I see him again in the afterlife. And then as it went further, I started to kind of toy. I remember saying this to my little brother at Christmas a couple years ago. I was like, I know this sounds crazy, but I was like, I've got this idea that not only is he still alive somewhere in reality, but that before this life, and he was looking at me like I'm crazy, and I was like, before this life, I was like, what if we went into this life almost like a huddle before a football game? And it's we're these eternal beings, and because we have eternity, we can take all the time we want. And I was like, what if we had this plan that was like, we're going to be born in New Hampshire, we're going to live in Georgia for a little bit, and then at 27, John's going to commit suicide, and we're going to go through this whole lesson, and then on and on. And, he kind of looked at me as like, dude, what are you talking about? But I've been thinking about that. Not only, like, what if it really was, just like, all right, Dr. Alexander, we're going to do this for 45 minutes, and then we're going to start recording, like, break, let's go. That's what you got into a lot. And could you elaborate on that a little more?
Yes, well, I think it's beautiful that you bring that up, and I love your analogy of the football huddle because I think in many ways that's kind of what our higher souls do.
Yeah.
Our soul groups kind of plan these things, and it's almost impossible for the ego mind to hear that and go, sure, I planned all this hardship. Oh, yes, I planned to get meningoencephalitis and be in a coma for 7 days and come extremely close to death.
Yeah.
And the ego says, are you out of your mind? Of course not. But this is about a much bigger journey than our ego can picture.
Yeah.
And that's why I think meditation is so important, because it helps to get us in touch with our higher soul, so we can take a much bigger look at things and try and get a helicopter view of our lives and of our relationships and of our meaning and purpose in living these lives. And in that kind of bigger setting, I think we start to see how maybe these plans were intentional. And in fact, I often like to say that even though I believe that such kind of soul group planning and what is known as kind of soul contract or soul agreement is something that in many ways we carry out, and it helps us to understand ourselves much better when we take that bigger vision. But it's very difficult to see it from down on this level. So it helps to gain the benefits of meditation and all that. Now, getting back to the issue of reincarnation, my 54 years of life spent as a card-toting, reductive materialist neuroscientist before coma did not involve any kind of serious consideration of reincarnation. Part of the problem, of course, is that most of us don't have ready memories of past lives.
Sure.
When you think about it, most of us really don't have much memory of anything before we were 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah.
Because our linguistic kind of memory recovery is a system that develops after that. So not being able to remember it in the here and now in these physical bodies doesn't necessarily mean it didn't happen. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think meditation and hypnosis can be so powerful, because they thin the veil and give us access to a much broader kind of swathe of memories that can include past lives and even between lives.
Yeah.
Now, in my coma journey, the first kind of line of evidence that pushed me when I came back to this world towards an acceptance of reincarnation was the challenge of trying to explain that infinitely loving, knowing, and healing God force that I became one with, as near-death experiencers do. How can that kind of a force of pure love that is so all-knowing, how can that exist in the setting if, say, children who are victims of warfare through no fault of their own, things like that, they have this one little incarnation, then it gets snuffed out. And my kind of general kind of reaction to all that from my coma experience was no. The only way to explain it is to realize our souls are eternal and they keep coming back in. And so it's, and I had these two incredible visions, in the core realm that showed me the reality not only of reincarnation, but also the power of the life review.
Yeah.
Now, given, those who know my NDE story realize one of the atypical features was that I was amnesic. I had no memories whatsoever of the life of Eben Alexander. I had no words, no language, complete empty slate. And that was a very powerful tool that I think enabled me to glean a lot of the deeper lessons that I did from my NDE. But the visions that I had that showed me reincarnation, one was this incredibly rich vision of kind of flying fish, schools of flying fish. Yeah. And I remember seeing very clearly how when we were down in the water, it was like we were living these lives. We were temporarily dumbed down. We didn't have all the knowledge of our higher soul, which of course can be recovered through meditation and spontaneous epiphanies and hypnosis. But we generally don't recover those kind of memories. But anyway, in the flying fish analogy, then we would pop up out of the water. And that was where we were free, flying, united with our higher souls, reunited with departed souls, loved ones. And that's where we went through life reviews and then planned next incarnations with it. And the next set of lessons to be learned in this progression towards oneness with the divine, because this is a very purposeful reincarnation. Yeah. It's not like
it's not random.
In Eastern traditions where it's a wheel of suffering that you're trying to get off of. This actually is goal-directed. And in many ways, that goal, I would say, was portrayed by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin in his beautiful book, The Phenomenon of Man in the Mid-20th Century, where he realized that evolution was much more than the puny little Darwinian biological version that was being considered by scientists at that time, but that all of consciousness throughout the universe was evolving.
Yeah.
And that, in my view, is exactly what's going on. The other vision I had that showed me reincarnation and life reviews very clearly was one that I often label Indra's net, because to me it likens my vision to that kind of ancient Eastern spiritual view, but it was this rich, incredible tapestry, and it was like a target. So there was this glowing center. That was the omega point, the Christ consciousness that de Chardin talked about. But all of these beautiful threads interwoven and leading towards that were of, incarnation in the material and then back up. It's almost like breathing, this progression of our lives going through this. And it made much, much more sense. And of course, the important thing that I recognized in those visions about the life review, and this is something that has been borne out by my study of the NDE literature and meeting and talking with thousands of experiencers over the last 12 years, is that whole notion that we tend to think of ourselves as a self, with a past and a future and memories of a past, and that self is isolated from others. And yet the evidence for non-local consciousness and the overlap of our consciousness through telepathy, remote viewing, precognition, and then these bigger categories of near-death experiences, shared death experiences, which are just like NDEs, but they usually happen in people who are physiologically normal, like a loved one at the bedside or a loved one 1,000 miles away whose soul gets pulled along on the journey. So all of those kind of notions for me were very powerful. But when I came back to this world, and the point I'm making there about the life review, just to clarify this, is that our boundaries of self dissolve. In the life review, you experience that from the emotional perspective of those around you who were impacted by your actions and thoughts. That's why in many ways, we often say the golden rule is written into the fabric of the universe in the form of those life reviews, because you feel what you did to others from their perspective. That's how the life review is most instructive and serves as such a beautiful course correction. To help us in planning those next incarnations. But and then the interesting thing, though, is I had these incredible visions. So I knew reincarnation was absolutely part of the package, and it was very confusing to default to my, my Methodist upbringing and its teaching of one incarnation, then eternal heaven or hell. But anyway, I didn't know until after my NDE, when I started doing my homework, that in fact the scientific literature supporting reincarnation is very strong.
Yeah.
And for any of your audience who want to learn more, I recommend go to uvadops.org. That's the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies.org.
Okay.
Scientific group, more than 6 decades of work, very serious scientists studying consciousness and all manner of consciousness, and they've accumulated more than 2,500 cases over the last 6 decades of past life memories in children, where the best explanation is really of reincarnation.
Yeah.
This is work that was begun by Dr. Ian Stevenson back in the 1960s. And of course, back in that era, as a psychiatrist, he was head of psychiatry at UVA, and he'd hear these stories of past life memories in children. And so he went out to discover what kind of psychological disease allowed these things to emerge. And the problem was he kept running into cases that he couldn't explain that way. And then when he did the deep homework to try and discover the life of the person described by the child, he would find it. He would find that there was somebody out there that lived that. And there are astonishing stories out there. In fact, one of the best ones, and this has been vetted by Dr. Jim Tucker, who does that work now, and I would highly recommend Dr. Jim Tucker's books on this, Life Before Life and Return. I can't remember his other one, but Jim Tucker, if you search him on Amazon, you'll get into this. But just extraordinary cases, but one that he vetted strongly, because these have to be, there's potential for fraud and people abusing the system and all. And so the scientists have to be very careful in doing their homework to make sure this is not just some fraud. And that's why these 2,500 plus cases are so valuable. But the one that comes to mind that's just an absolute joy to read, because the family it involves has written a book about it. It's the reincarnation story of a World War II fighter pilot. James Liniger is the child's name, Leininger, and I highly recommend it. The book is called Soul, Soul Survivor. And it's just absolutely loaded with just incredibly fascinating connections between this child and the events in the life he described that occurred more than 6 decades earlier. In a naval aviator who was killed in the Battle of Iwo Jima, or actually it was an adjacent island, but extraordinary kind of overlap, and you read stories like that, and plus the UVA literature is filled with stories like that. And there's just absolutely no way that this is just kind of made up nonsense. It's an astonishingly rich kind of portrayal of the deeper nature of human experience. But if you don't understand that reincarnation is part of the package, you're very confused. And for those who, like me, grew up in a Christian tradition, who might wonder about that, there's a beautiful book by Dr. Herbert Puryear, Puryear. It's called Why Jesus Taught Reincarnation. And it makes it very clear how reincarnation was absolutely part of original Christianity. Christ talked about John the Baptist being a reincarnated prophet from earlier times. So these concepts of reincarnation were alive and well. And it was only centuries after Christ, when Constantine, the Roman emperor, in their efforts to try and control Christianity, because they realized this thing had gotten much bigger than they ever thought it would. And they had the Council of Nicaea, and that's where they basically laid out some ground rules. But one of them was that any discussion of reincarnation formally by anyone related to the church would be punishable by inverted crucifixion. That's how much Constantine realized that if people understand, if souls understand that they have the power in this game, that they don't need to go through a middle player, tithing the church and going through a priest, but that in fact they have the power to guide their own soul journey as they come to this recognition that their souls come here repeatedly in a process of refinement towards that enlightenment. He realized how powerful that was, and it would undo their efforts to control the masses. And per year makes the argument very, very clearly, and also talks about why this is, in many ways, it's such a subterfuge that has been led by these religious leaders over thousands of years, all in an effort to control, and it actually diverts the message away from the true message of Christ. And in fact, all the messages of the prophets, I would say, in many ways have been kind of hijacked in some sense by other people who try to use religion to control people. And that's why this idea of the power of the soul and of our ability to go within, as Christ said, the answers lie within us all. These and greater things you will do. He was simply pointing out to us that all of us have what the modern kind of dogma sometimes says is only a Christ-like ability, to be an eternal soul in the Son of God, whereas we're all that. That's what Christ was trying to tell us. But we need to live that life that Christ exemplified of unconditional love for all of our fellow beings. Compassion, kindness, mercy. These are the themes that originally came from the prophets. And yet in many ways, especially in the superficial dogma of various religions and in the apparent conflict between religions, a lot of that is just false. It's not real, the deeper message. And you can approach that through the meditative traditions and through centering prayer and other modes of going within. I mean, this whole revolution we're talking about is a scientific revolution. It's based on neuroscience and quantum physics and a deeper understanding of the nature of reality. But at its very core is this notion of the one mind that we are all sharing. That's one thing the founding fathers of quantum physics, like Werner Heisenberg, Erwin Schrödinger, Wolfgang Pauli, and others, so profoundly said, based on the results of quantum experiments back in the early and mid-20th century, is consciousness is fundamental. You cannot get behind it. It's not derivative from physical matter. It's something that exists primarily in the universe. And in fact, the modern revolution in the scientific understanding of the brain-mind connection tells us that not only can we leave materialism and that completely ridiculous notion that the physical matter of the brain could create consciousness de novo, leave that in the distant dust. But so many of the dualities, and when you talk about mind-brain relationship, there are many different other things that say, well, we admit that you cannot reduce mind to a function of the brain, but somehow they seem to exist in parallel. And that's like putting Band-Aids on a broken system, to pretend that somehow we're going to patch up this notion of the mind-brain relationship through some of these dualisms. Because ultimately you run into problems with those halfway approaches. And ultimately the solution, I believe, as we point out, living in a mindful universe, lies in objective idealism, or what is known as analytical idealism. And this is a form where you actually see that consciousness or mind is the governing force of the events that unfold in the universe. Now, there are principles like natural laws and the principle of sufficient reason, as Leibniz promoted, that are very important because all those things apply. But the thing to understand more deeply is a lot of modern materialist scientists pretend that everything that rules the events in human lives is a bottom-up causality that comes from subatomic particles, atoms, molecules, and that it all comes from bottom up. And they basically believe there's no such thing as free will because they think it's all chemical reactions, electron fluxes in the brain. They give you the illusion of consciousness. Pay it no mind, they would say. Well, the reality is they have it backwards, and that's been one of the biggest problems. And in fact, quantum physics for the last century has been increasingly moving with the experiments towards this absolute certainty that the best answer is of idealism, that mind and top-down causality is what rules this world. And the good news is, as sentient beings, humans have access to that mental layer of the universe. And that is a tremendous gift. But it also is a tremendous responsibility. Because that implies that our choices have tremendous importance. Contrary to what, the hardcore materialist neuroscientists would tell you, nobody even has free will. Well, why do we even have a court system or
what are we doing?
Or prisons or anything? If nobody has free will, it's all chemical reactions. Just let it be. Well, that is because that is a false view. And we have responsibility for our choices. We are stewards of this planet. We are stewards of our own soul and our soul groups and our national ethnic groups and what have you. And it's high time to take responsibility for that. And that's what I think this awakening is all about. But a deeper understanding of reincarnation, that this is a process of refinement over multiple lifetimes, all building towards that tremendous growth towards oneness with the divine. From my point of view, that has tremendous power in explaining all of this.
Yes, sir. It's you're absolutely right. And the one thing I loved was that you, because I remember listening to your book and I was like, I wonder if Dr. Alexander's heard of Ram Dass. And then you got into Ram Dass and I was like, yes. But it's because I always quote him in that, like, he talks about it and he's like, you know, what do you do if you don't reach the point by the end of your life? And he has some saying from, you know, Ram Dass, he died last year, he was in his 90s, but he had some saying, I think it was from like a show. He was like, I don't know who Larry is, but he was like, send them through again, Larry. It just means like you didn't get the lesson. Like, or his other one was, hey, like, you're in school, take the curriculum. He's like, you're here, learn. And that's one thing I've been trying to look at, because it's like what you said. It's Constantine, or even the comedian Bill Hicks, who died in 93. He's like, there's a lot of people that don't want you to know it's just a ride. Because we've got a lot invested in this ride. Shut him up. But once you realize it's just a ride, you can't really slave away in a system that doesn't mean anything. Because if you realize that, like you said, or Duncan Trussell said, kind of the inverse of your analogy, he said, like, we're dolphins and the sea is the one mind. And what we do is we jump up out of the water and we do a couple flips and we bathe in the sun and it's like this beautiful thing. And then we come back in again and it's like, hey, let's go through again. But that's what I love, the idea of what you were saying, that it's not just the spinning wheel of now you're a turtle, now you're an emperor, now you're in a concentration camp. It's like, no. Just like college isn't, here's a biology class, here's a finance class. It's like you're getting your major, right?
But I think the ultimate lesson that people need to remember there is certainly the kind of gold standard. You know, how do we make sense of kind of good, bad, darkness, light, masculine, feminine, all the dualities, all the polarities that exist in this dualistic realm? Where's the answer? And the answer lies, I would say, very deeply in those life reviews and in those profound kind of assessments of our existence that we all go through at the end of life. And that answer also is about that love and how powerful that is. That's why in the life review, that's the brilliant light against which everything else is measured. And what so many near-death experiences will tell you is you don't go through that feeling like you're being judged by God or some higher power, because God is actually the pure light of love that's there to serve as that standard, kind of like the image at the horizon to show you the direction in which to go. And I think that's one of the most beautiful aspects of all this, is to understand that love that everyone feels there. And you realize that to the extent to which your actions and your perceptions of the emotional truth in those around you in the life review, what it's all showing you is that ideally you simply treat yourself and other beings with the pure, unconditional love that is your birthright, that is demonstrated in those life reviews as such a profound indicator of the ultimate truth to which we aspire. And it's almost as if it's kind of a neutral ground in sense, because as I said in Proof of Heaven, you can do no wrong. But what that really means is you have the freedom of will, the freedom of choice to decide in every moment and interaction with others and any dealings with yourself, how to interpret this and how to move forward with your understanding. And the more that you can bring all of that into the direction of love and light and compassion and kindness, mercy, acceptance, when necessary, forgiveness, the more it aligns with that golden rule written into the fabric of the universe by that experience in the life review, showing you that love is ultimately it. And that, in fact, I remember when I first came back from my coma, I realized that what we often see is this conflict between light and dark, good and evil. That in fact there was no opposing force of darkness or evil. There's nothing there that supports it. There's plenty there that supports that infinite love force of God that NDEers and prophets and mystics have experienced forever. But my realization was that the the apparent darkness and evil is the absence of the light and love.
Yeah.
And each and every one of us can serve as a change agent by being a conduit to bring that light and love into this universe. And just like in the life review, with that God force of pure love serving as kind of an absolute standard of truth, we can learn to bring that into this world and share it.
Yeah.
And it's not that it'll be going out to oppose a force of darkness or evil. It simply replaces it and supplants it. Because the only true force of change here is really that light and love. And we can all serve to help spread that to the world, bring it into our own lives, and realize, as you and I discussed in our last conversation, that all is well.
All is well.
And you've got that higher kind of helicopter view way above your little ego view.
Yeah.
Because your ego is going to always get kind of trapped in these up and down battles. And the ego does serve a purpose, to help in survival in the world. But it is not your ally in growing into the higher soul that you came here to be.
Yeah.
That's where we really have to open our minds and start developing our relationships with that kind of higher consciousness. And we all have the power to do that in meditation. Of course, that's why I'm such a big proponent of sacredacoustics.com, as we discussed last time. And full disclosure, my life partner and co-author of Living in a Mindful Universe, Karen Newell, is the co-founder of Sacred Acoustics.
Yeah.
But
I've used it. It's great. I have.
I hope you've had a little experience with it at this point.
I have. It's you mentioned it last time. For everyone listening, they're binaural beats, but the way I believe you described it in one of your articles was it's a lot like following. Where did I read? It's like following a what word am I looking for? A railing, like a railing up like a hiking path, like through like the cloudy mountain, and it's like. You got to hold on to it, and then all of a sudden the clouds break, and you don't need the railing anymore. But being someone that's meditated almost every day since 2008, that was really helpful because up until I started using Sacred Acoustics, it was just it was a crapshoot. It was maybe today I'll get to experience the light, and then maybe for 10 days it will just be like, focusing and then whatever. But with that, it's that kind of, it's your railing. It's not the end goal, but what it is, it's a very helpful path. It's it's the ball on the side. You're bowling and the ball gets stuck in the thing and it goes to the end. You use it, you get into that, and like you said, really you're focusing on like the reptilian part of your brain, the most primitive part. You get into the rhythm, and then you don't need it. You sort of get above the clouds, and then it's like, well, you can't really describe it. You know what it is. I know what it is.
Absolutely.
You get there and you'll know when you know. It's just for everyone thinking that, it really is helpful. And this is from someone that's meditated every day for 12 years. It's very, very helpful. So, sorry to interrupt you, but I did want to tell you that.
I'm so glad you've had some experience with meditating with Sacred Acoustics. And the thing is, whatever a person's technique is for going within, for quieting the little ego voice, the little running stream of thoughts in our head, there are many different ways to do that. And we simply offer Sacred Acoustics because it is a very powerful way of doing that. And by way of explanation, from a neuroscientific perspective, I'd like to simply point out to people that whatever kind of chant, anthem, hymn, you may have ever heard in your life that engendered a transcendental state of conscious awareness, that whole process was happening way up in circuits in your neocortex, in the acoustic cortex. In parts, circuits that basically have developed and evolved in the last 1 to 5 billion years in primates and in Homo sapiens. And yes, they can have a big old influence on a lot of what's going on in your in the detailed calculator of the neocortex, which has a lot to do with this filtering in of reality that you get. But the reason that Sacred Acoustics and similar binaural beat technologies are so powerful is because they're actually going for a circuit that arose more than 300 million years ago in evolutionary neurobiology, way down in the lower brainstem. And there's a general principle in evolutionary biology. Any time you want to get to the root of a certain kind of function, like consciousness, you need to kind of look at the evolution, the genetics, and look at the anatomy and go back to the beginning to get a deeper idea. And that's exactly what happens with Sacred Acoustics is these slight differences in the frequencies going to the two ears
Yep.
is interpreted by a circuit in the lower brainstem, that ancient circuit that I just mentioned, in a way that seems to completely short circuit our conscious awareness and allow our conscious awareness to roam free.
Yeah.
That's why, even though binaural beats and that whole phenomenon of that wavering sensation and its alteration of consciousness is something that was discovered in the mid 1800s by a Prussian physicist named William Heinrich Dove. And then in the mid and late 20th century, people who were interested in out-of-body experiences and remote viewing, the kind of psychic spy ability to discern information at a great distance, time and space, they discovered that, wow, these superhuman kind of mental capacities are enhanced by binaural beats.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're taking advantage of now is you can develop, it's a way of thinning the veil, of accessing primordial mind, getting outside of the here and now and sense of self and out of your body and brain, and having a much greater influence and kind of an understanding, discernment of information from the world, but also the outflow, the ability to affect it, like in distance healing, remote healing, which there are many practitioners in the world today who can be very powerful. And there have been scientific studies, for example, of cells growing in a tissue culture or bacteria that can be influenced by healing thoughts from a distance, from a sentient being. So
it's
lots of power to all this, and we're just beginning to discover how we can wield that power in basically defining the emergence of the reality of our loftiest dreams.
I was going to say about the CIA with remote viewing. The head guy for a while, not the director of the CIA, but the head remote viewer was a guy named Joseph McMoneagle.
Oh yeah, I know him. He's a friend of ours.
Yeah, and he. For everyone listening, he would talk about, he'd be like, they give me coordinates and things, and I'd be laying in like an isolation chamber on like water and salt, listening to binaural beats. But it was like, it's not this, it's not, oh, that's just a hippie. It's like, no, this is a guy, like top guy at the CIA, and he's looking for like the trigger mechanism on a nuclear weapon and made in China. And it's like, this was as like classified and highly regarded as the Corona and Keyhole satellites and the U-2 and SR-71. Like this wasn't, new age. This was the CIA at the height of the Cold War.
Absolutely.
Like this is the real deal. It's
right. Yeah. And if you, Joe McMoneagle has written several interesting books about remote viewing, but when you go back in his history, he first kind of discovered these skills when he was a soldier in Vietnam in the battlefield. Yeah. That's where he started realizing kind of the power of his kind of intuitive remote viewing abilities. And he's just a fascinating person, as are, that whole remote viewing literature is absolutely fascinating. Yeah. And it's been scientifically and statistically validated beyond any reasonable doubt.
Yes.
Now, if you go to Wikipedia, of course, they say it's pseudoscience, but that's because, unfortunately, Wikipedia is just drowning in this materialist nonsense and ignorance and blindness, which is unfortunate. Wikipedia could be a great source of knowledge, and yet their editors are so closed-minded about some of this stuff, they have no idea what's going on. They are clueless. And it makes Wikipedia a rampant spreader of misinformation. But if you read Jessica Utz, who is the head of the American Statistical Society or Association in 2015, and her presidential address, she had worked as a scientist investigating both remote viewing and precognition, the work of Daryl Bem and others, that we can know the future. And she knew that statistically and scientifically, both those effects are absolutely real. You'd be a damned fool to doubt it. But if you don't study the literature, you're a damned fool. And that's the problem with Wikipedia today, is those editors just have no idea about what's really going on here and the scientific validity of that. But in her presidential address, it was interesting because she said, and this was given to 6,000 plus scientists and statisticians at the annual meeting, and they were from 62 countries around the world. It's a global organization. But she made it clear that when she asked her fellow colleagues, have you studied the literature on precognition or remote viewing? They'd say, no, I don't believe in that stuff, so why would I waste my time? And then she'd say, well, what would change your mind? More data or a personal experience? And almost to a person, they said personal experience. And that's one of the reasons why Karen and I are just huge we're trying to get sacred acoustics and similar tools and these kind of ideas out to the world because they are so empowering. And, I have found that the greatest gift in this deep and profound analysis of the nature of reality and the mind-body question is true, rabid, open-minded skepticism. And it turns out that the problem is that many of the kind of scientists out there and journalists who kind of put this stuff down and say it's woo-woo nonsense, they really, they've made up their mind. They're prejudiced. They have nothing to do. They're pseudo-skeptics. Or they pretend to be skeptics, but they are so prejudicial about this that they wouldn't know the truth if it smacked them in the head. So, open your mind and pay attention to the details. And in fact, from my point of view, a quote from René Descartes says it best. And this quote is in the book Proof of Heaven. But he said, if you would see yourself as a true seeker, you must, at least at one point in your life, reject everything that you believe. All of your assumptions about the nature of reality must be rejected and then questioned and then brought back in one by one under much more heavy analysis. And that's what I've had to do in the 12 years since my coma, is go back to square one and build up a worldview that makes more sense. But the good news is, I think, in the scientific perspective, we're absolutely getting to this point with this notion of analytical idealism and the realism of that top-down causality in the universe and our influence to basically affect all of the outcome. Just as we know in placebo effect, in medicine, we've honored that for 60 years. And placebo effect is nothing more than the admission by the medical science community that someone's beliefs and attitudes and thoughts can play a tremendous role in their ability to heal from certain symptoms and illnesses. And placebo effect is a beautiful example of mind over matter, which is exactly what all of this is about. And the more we realize if we can control and kind of modulate our health, yes, we can control and modulate and influence all the emerging events of our lives.
That was the thing in college that really started to get me when I was pre-med and I was shadowing like anesthesiologists. One thing that it always got me was like, to me, that was like that's when I came to a head of like materialism. It had been building up for several years. And then I got to this point where it was like every Wednesday I would volunteer at Athens Regional at the University of Georgia. And I would see the doctor put the mask on, turn the gas on, or, the propofol or whatever. And the person would go out. And I would be like, there is this ball of 3.5 pounds of fat and protein, protoplasm, and then the I, whoever it is, Bob, Susie, they just vanish. And I was like, what is going on? And that's when I started to get into the easy question and hard question of consciousness. I was like, where do you dissect it and see, here's the self? But then I started to think like, that's weird because no matter what their belief is, whether they are materialist or whether they're a Christian or a Buddhist or a Muslim, is like when the gas goes on, they're out. When I started thinking, I was like, man, that is a definitive almost like belief that the gas comes on and it's out. Well, then that led to this whole, and right around the same time is learning about the double slit experiment in consciousness, and then as well as the placebo effect. And it all started to kind of swirl together, and I was like, that's why I was like, there are some profound implications. And like, as someone that like to at the time and now think of myself as a scientist, I was like, the one flaw we always learn when learning about the history of science is like, you don't have your model and fit the world into it. You examine the world and build your model. And if it doesn't fit, well, how could an alien get here? The speed of light is the speed limit. Well, no, at a certain point you have to go like, well, maybe our model's not right. It's like
Yes.
maybe the world isn't flat. Maybe that's heresy. But
Yes.
this whole thing started to come together. I was like, yeah, maybe my model's not, because I'm looking at it. I'm like, okay, I know it's protein, I know it's fat, and I know that's propofol. Where does this come from? And finally, I was like, you know what? There's a very good chance that maybe I don't have it right, and maybe this is the flat Earth. Maybe this is witch doctor. Maybe I have no idea what's going on. But that's refreshing to hear you say that. You have to throw it all out and take it in piece by piece.
And the good news is that starting at very basic principles, and I would say that you discover those deep in meditation by kind of quieting that little voice in the head, blanking out that little ego voice, and then realizing that your consciousness is that awareness.
Yes.
And then you can start developing that awareness. And that awareness is not limited to the here and now and to the sense of self. Yeah. It really is a shared consciousness. There's a beautiful book out there by a colleague and good friend of ours, Dr. Larry Dossey. The book is called One Mind. And it is, from my point of view, one of the most valuable and powerful books to understand, to help people get to the next level. It's very well written. It's not at all heavily scientific, although it's got some deep science backing it up. He makes it very clear this is not just about human mind, but in fact, animals, and in many ways, I would say plants. I mean, living systems are always kind of a presentation of this one mind.
Yeah.
And it all exists within that one mind. But the beauty of it is we're kind of like facets on a diamond. So the diamond is the one mind, and the facets are the different perspectives. So yes, it's different for each and every one of us, and yet it's all about the same universe that we coexist in and are part of. Yeah. It's a beautiful notion to start getting this oneness concept. It's something Karen and I talk about a lot. In fact, we're just getting ready now. We're gearing up for a big webinar we're going to do on the Shift Network beginning in a few weeks or so that will have to do with this concept of the one mind and how powerful it is for any individual seeker and soul on this journey, as well as for the rest of society at large and for humanity at large to kind of grasp this kind of depth of the oneness we share through mind, through consciousness, and in essence, kind of that shared purpose of growing towards that love and compassion and kindness for all. The world can become a far better place as this emerging science of consciousness. Science is an objective system of sharing information, and that's why we've had 5,000 years for various religions that came out of the journeys of prophets and mystics trying to explain the nature of reality, and all of that combined with individuals' capacities to go within through meditation and centering prayer. But for many people, it was always just a question of, do I believe that prophet or mystic, and do I believe that scripture and dogma or not? And that's why going within is so powerful. That's why the fact that this time around, it's the quantum physics and it's the neuroscience of consciousness and philosophy of mind that are actually driving the bus, because they offer us an objective kind of understanding and worldview that we can compare, contrast, elaborate on, and share. And because the basis in science, it has tremendous power to change this world. Now, the mistake that many people make, and this includes the majority of scientific journalists, is they think that conventional materialist science is the correct model. Mm-hmm. And in fact, that model should have been thrown out 80 years ago with the advent of quantum physics. It's just that the deep findings of quantum physics, and as I said a while ago, the experiments keep refining and pushing us towards this absolute acknowledgement of the primacy of mind. Just as the founding fathers of quantum physics knew, they intuited that from the experiments, and yet in the ensuing decades, materialist scientists have balked at that, and they fought for other explanations. And in fact, one of the most ready explanations of the measurement paradox in quantum physics among physicists who want to avoid any discussion of consciousness is Hugh Everett's 1957 many worlds interpretation, infinite parallel universes. And for them, then they can just go, okay, no more need for discussing consciousness. Just realize that at every branch point, in the emergence of the universe in space and time, that the universe branches into multiple options. And if you're willing to accept infinite parallel universes, then we don't need to talk about consciousness and mind. And of course, that's ridiculous because what we actually experience is one universe. And the reason for that is it's all being driven from that mental layer. Even though it's very interesting that this deep lesson of quantum physics, when you get down to it, the proof is showing us, and this is especially reflected in experiments that have just been done this year, the proof is once again showing that we have a kind of a one-to-one relationship with the universe and the mental consciousness of the universe. So that it really proves to us, when you get to the depths of these experiments, that there is no external physical world independent of the observing mind. And that is the absolutely essential lesson. It's inevitable. We're not going to come to some other conclusion because the evidence pushes us that way. But, I'm not saying that we have full explanations of that. That, for me, as a neuroscientist, is absolutely essential now. And that's what I do a lot of my work on with other scientists around the world. And speaking of those other scientists, I would highly recommend to your viewership GalileoCommission.org. I don't know if we brought them up before, but GalileoCommission.org. I'm one of the 100+ scientific advisors for that group. If you go there, there's a manifesto that really makes it very clear a lot of this revolution in science that I'm talking about. But it's inevitable. Materialism is dead. It died 80 years ago, but some people still haven't read the memo. But we need to elaborate how this kind of idealism really works. And for those in quantum physics who want to, just a quick little update on that, go to 2005 in the scientific journal Nature. There's an article by Richard Kahn Henry. He was the head of astrophysics at Johns Hopkins, no slouch in modern physics and quantum physics and cosmology. And he makes it very clear in a simple one-page essay entitled Mental Universe. And it's on my website. People go to ebenalexander.com. I've got a suggested reading list with more than 100 books, chapters, and scientific papers, many with active live links to the papers themselves. But Richard Kahn Henry is right in there. Go find that, and it'll help you understand what I'm talking about, this top-down causality. Another resource for the scientifically minded, go to the writings of George F.R. Ellis. He's a South African mathematician. He's written extensively about top-down causality in quantum physics, which is a very deep and profound kind of understanding of the mental universe and how it works. The more we can come to understand all that, the more we can turn this world into a far better place.
Dr. Alexander 2024 for president, because I'll vote for you, man. We need you. I want you at the reins. I want you behind the guy with the nuclear weapons.
I'm just trying to help in any way I can. And I certainly would be willing to, talk with political leaders and everything. I'm not sure if I have it in me to jump into that fray, but I am absolutely here to help this world become better for all souls. That's what I believe is a big mistake of our materialist thinking, is it tends to let us believe we're all separate. And that's not true. We're all in this together. That's what those life reviews show you, that to hurt another is to hurt yourself. So violence, warfare, conflict, political polarization, economic polarization, destruction of the planet, threatening the extinction of 1 million species through our addiction to fossil fuels and plastics, etc. It's time to wake up. Homo sapiens means wise. Well, I would say right now, when I look at this world, I'm not seeing a species that is very wise. It's actually threatening to destroy life on the planet. And it is high time we took responsibility for our choices and took stewardship of this planet and started to take much better care of all of our fellow beings.
Maybe I was thinking just the life review and experiencing our actions through others. And I know it's been 45 minutes. I'll let you go. Really just to look at the consciousness standpoint. If we really want to step back, who's to say that we are not an Earth consciousness now experiencing what it's like to be a human species, to understand, kind of like the uncle making fun of the big nose. Maybe we are Earth, maybe we are Gaia experiencing humans. Why did they destroy me? And then we're like, oh, it's because they needed energy and they needed fossil fuel and they were overfishing, and it's then we go back to the earth and we're like, why did the earth like destroy us? And it's like, oh, because we are eating. I don't know. That's another conversation for another time. But before you go, I did want to ask. I'll email. Yeah, I'll email you. I would love to talk to you about kind of Ram Dass psychedelics and the MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. I think that is
There's
another frontier.
Tremendous amount to talk about
Yes.
psychedelics. I think 2 points I'd like to make
Sure.
just very quickly
Sure.
up front, and then yes, I'd love to talk with you again sometime.
Sure.
But one point is, thank God, luckily, recently we've gotten rid of some of those laws that
Yeah.
have, prevented research, and
I know.
some of the most promising research in addiction and alcoholism work and in fear of death in cancer patients has been through psilocybin.
Yes.
One dose can have profound beneficial effect lasting for years. And this is in the proper therapeutic setting. Now, I don't encourage people to go out and use psilocybin. In fact, what I would tell you is if you read Christopher Bache, B-A-C-H-E, his book, Dark Night, Early Dawn, he actually compares his high-dose LSD work for spiritual growth with his work with binaural beats. And binaural beats come out very favorably as giving you the very same, if not better, benefits over a period of dedicated time.
Yeah.
So very important point. And I believe this ties into placebo effect and mind over matter and all that. But it's important that the psychedelics are kind of helping us understand that greater power of mind.
Yeah.
The other key point, and of course we discussed this all in Living in a Mindful Universe, is that business of the recent scientific papers beginning in 2012, Imperial College in London, Robin Carhart Harris and others, looking at first psilocybin, then DMT, ayahuasca, more recently LSD, using fMRI, functional MRI, and magnetoencephalography, and finding that, in fact, the biggest surprise to materialist science is that your brain goes dark.
Yeah.
Anyone who's ever experienced those drugs will think, oh, my brain must be lighting up with like a Christmas tree to give me this phenomenal experience. Well, no, your brain is actually getting out of the way. Every bit of the neuronal population that can be assessed with those technologies says the brain is basically going away, going to sleep, getting out of the picture. So to find the answers to what we experience there, we need to go beyond the brain and beyond the physical reality. Those are two very key points about psychedelics that I think people need to understand. There's a tremendous amount more to discuss. Much of that we do cover in Living in a Mindful Universe. So I would encourage people who are fascinated by that, go out and get Living in a Mindful Universe, and you'll see how we integrate all of this information into a deeper understanding of the nature of the human spirit and its true ultimate potential.
Yes, and for everyone listening, Living in a Mindful Universe, that will be in the description and in the top comment. And if you enjoyed this podcast, it's read by Dr. Alexander, which, fantastic job, by the way, as a audiobook connoisseur. You have a fantastic voice for reading.
Thank you.
My 2 cents for you.
I appreciate that. And
yes,
I know
sir.
we covered in our last session, though, but how many people have both read Proof of Heaven and listened to the audiobook.
Yes.
And even though the words are identical, they would tell me that they got so much more out of the audiobook.
100%. 100%.
So much more information. Even though the words were identical, there's more that comes through the voice, and people can feel that emotion. They can feel the power of my journey and how it impacted me through the voice. So I love your shout out to the audiobooks.
Absolutely. No, I mean, really, it's I have one as of right now. I have 1,088 titles in my library. I've listened to a lot. You have a fantastic voice for reading, regardless of the story. You have a great voice, but tie it into the story. It's amazing. I have now kept you for 7 minutes longer than I said I would. I will email you. I'd love to do. Yeah, we can put together a talk in, I don't know, sometime in 2020, January, maybe February, whatever, for psychedelic studies. But I will let you go. Thank you so much for that. That was awesome. You are Ram Dass, because I never met him, but talking to you, being around you, I said this to my dad last time. I said I walked away from it and I was like, I felt like I was just talking to someone that like loved me objectively as a spirit, and it's very refreshing. You are a sunny day, and looking at you, I'm just like, I feel warmer. So thank you for that, sir.
So do I. You have a lot of that very same power.
Oh, well, thank you, sir.
Sharing it, and I'm sure you're bringing that to your audience. So that's a great thing.
I hope so. Dr. Alexander.
Great talking with you.
You too, sir. Merry Christmas. Stay safe out there. God bless America. God bless everybody. And thank you, Dr. Alexander.
Well, and thank you, and God bless you, and I appreciate all of your work to help enlighten souls.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. All right, you have a good one.
All right, we'll talk soon, and Merry Christmas to you too.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Best wishes for the new year, and we'll talk soon.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. What a cool guy.